We've talked about Ruby, Haskell, which are two completely different languages, which actually share something in the way we write code. And I've seen a talk of you at CodeSync 2019, where at a certain point you're describing the differences between defensive and offensive programming, where I personally believe that Haskell and Ruby and other languages, of course, can be described as, let's say, defensive programming. And okay, so can you please explain the defensive and offensive programming?
Sure. And I think this is one of the, as far as I know, Erlang is the only language that does this well. Erlang-based languages are the only ones that do this well that I know of. But I could be wrong. Let's start with defensive programming. So the idea of defensive programming is that you acknowledge the fact that things can go wrong because no matter how good your code is, the universe is not on your side. Computers are rubbish. Physics is against you. Entropy happens. Your hard drive crashes, or your server gets struck by a bolt of lightning, or someone drags their feet across the carpet and builds up a static charge and zaps the computer, flicking some bits from 1 to 0. Something goes wrong, and errors are going to happen. Defensive programming is the idea that, before you can do anything, you just have to quickly check and make sure everything is in the state it should be. So I've been given a pointer to a thing. Oh, let's just quickly check that it isn't a null pointer. Are you a null pointer? No, you're not a null pointer. All right, now we can go. Which is great because you're acknowledging the fact that things can go wrong and you have to do something about that. It's not so great because your code is one line of business logic and 3 lines of if this is a null pointer.
Yeah. Okay.
Return an error, log, do something. I don't know. Okay, move on to the next thing, and it gets quite repetitive and quite verbose, and it's very frustrating. In the Erlang world, they say no, don't do defensive programming, do offensive programming. So what is offensive programming? So rather than saying, oh, is this did that last thing succeed? Did something go wrong? No, it didn't go wrong. Okay, let's continue. They say that previous thing definitely succeeded. It definitely didn't go wrong. And then it carries on. And if it turns out that it did go wrong, when you were making that assertion when you're making that assertion that it definitely didn't go wrong, the programmer says, oh no, something's gone horribly wrong, and it crashes. Okay. Which in most languages would be awful. Most languages that'd be really awful. But in Erlang, the idea of crashing and acknowledging the fact that things are going to crash, things are going to go wrong and explode is built into your program. So rather than having all of this sort of local error handling, so you say if this went wrong, handle the error here. You say it definitely didn't go wrong, we could just continue. And then somewhere else, much higher up in your program, you effectively have a checkpoint, and you say, okay, from here down, if anything goes wrong, here's how we restart and try again, or here's how we handle the error. And so you define things at a much higher level. And so I think in practice, you really want kind of a mix of both offensive and defensive programming, because and I think it comes down to how you categorize errors. So if a few examples, if you are writing a web service that people type in some I don't know, their credit card details, and sends it to you, and you place a payment, and you share the thing saying, congratulations, you just bought our book or something. If they could give you invalid credit card number, right? And in which case the transaction is going to fail because those details aren't correct. Well, you really don't want to use offensive programming here, because if every time someone makes a typo typing in the credit card number, your web server crashes, you're going to have a terrible experience. And he's just oh, I've just tried to buy a book and it says 500 internal server error. Has my credit card been stolen? What's going on? Something's gone horribly wrong. I'll never buy anything from this store ever again.
Got it.
So you don't want to do offensive programming there. That's an awful idea. You want to do defensive programming. You want to say try and place the payment. Did it succeed? No, it didn't. Okay, well, I'll let the user know. And that's because that is an expected error that's within your domain. A different example, say you're writing a cache, and that cache writes to the file system, so got some data, I'll just quickly open a file, write it to the file, and then just carry on. So you expect always to be able to write to files on the file system, And if you can't, something has gone horribly wrong. Like something is seriously wrong with your computer if you can't write files. So like, okay, we're not going to do defensive programming because, well, what can you actually do when you can't write to files anymore? Like there is nothing reasonable you can do. This is a place to be offensive. You say, I assert that I can definitely write to a file, and I'm going to continue on with my code. And then you don't write all this super verbose error handling logic. You just write the things you want to do and then move on. So that's sort of like that's a short and hopefully somewhat understandable explanation of my theory on offensive and defensive programming. Now, and I'll say, like you said that Ruby is defensive. I'm not sure I'd agree. Well, maybe it's just me when I was writing Ruby, but I always felt like it was more like YOLO programming. Because we never really checked if the errors occurred or not. We just sort of hoped they wouldn't, and if they did happen, everything just went wrong. Like there wasn't any special error handling mechanism or fault tolerance. Just like, yeah, it should work. Maybe it was just me. Maybe I'm being quite harsh on the Ruby community. Probably just me.
Yeah, I don't have memories of me writing that kind of Ruby, but maybe I was writing wrong. For sure, I was writing wrong Ruby.